Who do you think you will do in the how do you think you'll do in the upcoming election? Sorry, folks, I can't even read this. What is your favorite food?
What is my favorite food?
First of all, how do you think you're going to do in the upcoming election?
I think we're going to win. My favorite food is a nice veal parmesan with nice Caesar salad. I'm dreaming about it because I haven't had it for so long.
Let me wipe the drool off his chin.
Seriously. And some nice pasta on the side with hot peppers, the hottest peppers you can have. That's with some bruschetta, some bread. That's my favorite, but okay. I haven't had that in so long.
That's a 2014 clip from the short-lived Canadian TV program Ford Nation. And when I say short-lived, I'm not kidding. There was precisely one episode ever aired on TV and then 5 web-only episodes. Most of the show is like this. It's just 2 guys in front of a crinkled backdrop showing a photograph of the Toronto skyline going on about not much, really. They read fan mail. They talk about how there's a lot of Canadians in Los Angeles. Here's their thoughts on actor Kevin Spacey.
I want to start off with saying Kevin Spacey is an incredible actor. He is. He really is.
I don't watch movies. So
but Rob?
I wouldn't know him if I ran him over.
So with hindsight, it may be hard to believe that one of the hosts of Ford Nation is currently one of the most powerful political figures in the entire country. Doug Ford. He's the guy with the strong opinions on Kevin Spacey. He's currently serving his 3rd majority term as Premier of Ontario, Canada's biggest province. At the time this podcast goes to air, Doug Ford has won majorities in 3 consecutive provincial elections, something nobody else has done in Ontario since the 1950s. The other guy at the time was the mayor of Toronto, Canada's biggest city, Rob Ford. That's the guy who likes veal. That's Doug's brother. He was also at the time arguably the most well-known Canadian in the world. Michael Bublé, Celine Dion, Justin Bieber, yeah, people might have known their names, but they weren't generating fevered conversation on every single world continent all at once. The Australian media called Rob Ford the Falstaffian mayor of Toronto, Falstaff being a Shakespearean character known for his immense bulk and corrupt morals. The New Yorker called him the rotund, wayward mayor of Toronto. Rob Ford was one of the extremely few Canadian politicians to ever be parodied on Saturday Night Live.
So what do you have to say to the voters after this tumultuous week?
Ooh, just that I goofed up, eh? You see, my face is as red as a Boxing Day ham.
A side note, actor Bobby Moynihan apparently couldn't do a decent Rob Ford impression, so he just went with a Minnesota accent. Rob Ford was also the subject of a feature film, Run This Town, which came out in 2019.
You don't think it'll be forever, do you? Just like a suspension, more of?
The coaching? I think if there's no video, then nothing's gonna...
No, there's no video. I swear there's none.
Ford was known for being a really chunky guy, but for some reason, he was played in that movie by the rail-thin English actor Damian Lewis, who had to wear an awful lot of makeup. Anyways, back to the short-lived show Ford Nation, the show whose tagline was, "Get to know the mayor that the whole world is talking about." The Ford brothers never say this in the show, but the reason the whole world was talking about Rob Ford, of course, is because he admitted to smoking crack in a basement somewhere in what he said was probably one of his, quote, drunken stupors, and then said that this sort of thing happened all the time. But that's not even the wildest part of what was going on. I'm Tristan Hopper, and this is Canada Did What? And today we're looking into the saga of one of the most well-known Canadian politicians of all time. The one Canadian elected official who's entered the global zeitgeist more than any other. Rob Ford, the so-called crack mayor of Toronto. But the Rob Ford story is so outrageous that there's all these other intersecting layers of outrageousness that never really got the attention they deserved because they were all overwhelmed by the basic background level of outrageousness that surrounded Rob Ford at all times. You probably already knew that Rob Ford admitted to smoking crack in November 2013, setting off one of the most dramatic political flameouts in Canadian history.
Yes, I have smoked crack cocaine. But no, do I? Am I an addict? No.
When have you
I tried it? Probably in one of my drunken stupors.
But what you probably didn't know was the absolutely bananas behind-the-scenes story of how all of this was the work of a single Somalian-Canadian gang member who had just been trying to scrape up enough money to start a new life out west in Alberta. Instead, he summoned down an unholy rain of fire and trouble that burned him and several other people, way more than it ever burned Rob Ford. Because if you're making a movie about the Rob Ford crack scandal, I'd argue your protagonist isn't Rob Ford. It's the 27-year-old criminal who captured the video, thought he had hit the jackpot only for events to quickly spiral out of his control. But first, let's meet his worship, Mayor Robert Bruce Ford.
There's been times when I've been in a drunken stupor.
Throw it out, I'll poke his eyes out. When he's dead, he'll make sure that motherfucker's dead.
I was very, very inebriated.
I am a sick motherfucker, dude, but no one's gonna around me.
Obviously, I was extremely, extremely inebriated.
One of the most surreal things about Toronto under Mayor Ford was that pretty regularly he would show up in some completely random place blitzed on some unknown substance. For instance, it's a Monday night in the summer of 2014, and you're having a beer at Sully Gordon's, a divey strip mall tavern in the westernmost fringes of Toronto. Suddenly, an extremely inebriated Rob Ford charges in and delivers an extended soliloquy about all his enemies' darkest thoughts and workplace crushes. The tape was leaked to the Toronto Sun. He refers to one guy as a dumb effing wop and an effing dago, two ethnic slurs for Italians, and asks, "Sorry, is that racist?" Then he says he's going to knock his effing teeth out. He also says of City Councillor Karen Stintz that he wants to, quote, jam her, unquote. But she don't want it, he says.
How about Karen Stintz?
I'd like to her, but I can't.
Adding, "I'm so sorry, I forgot there was a woman in the house." Or maybe it's the spring of 2012. Ford, who is quite overweight, has launched a public pledge to lose weight. It's called the Mayor Ford Cut the Waist Challenge. He even has a weekly weigh-in in front of reporters. Anyway, you're sitting at a Toronto KFC when Ford, clad in his mayor clothes, comes in and buys a giant bag of fried chicken, all while fellow patrons yell at him, "Aren't you supposed to be on a diet?" Or my personal favorite, Rob Ford shows up drunk at a Greek diner known as Steak Queen and proceeds to go on an extended rant delivered in Jamaican patois.
I said, bro, well, me and him, mirage, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, hey, leave me alone, man. They got 5 months for me. And then trying to tell me, bro, we're counter-surveilling the guy, you know what I mean? He's hiding here, I'm hiding here,
Rasclat and Bumbaclot are both Jamaican expletives. The other Jamaican term there is cha. It's sort of like a Jamaican equivalent of theh. And here's the part we've never really been able to explain. Ford's patois is pretty good. I was the night reporter at the National Post at the time, and I got in touch with a Jamaican patois expert in Jamaica who was amazed how closely the Toronto mayor had nailed the dialect. And we never ever heard him speaking patois ever again. It's just this one time at the Steak Queen. You can see why Rob Ford made international headlines so readily in the mid-2010s. He was outrageous. You never knew what he was going to do, where he was going to show up, and what he was going to say. Here's Ford in 2013 responding to allegations that he offered to perform oral sex on a female staffer.
Oh, and the last thing was Olivia Gondak. It says that I wanted to eat her Olivia Gondak. I've nenever said that in my life to her. I would never do that. I'm happily married. I've got more than enough to eat at home.
Now, I'm not going to pretend that random, intemperate behavior hasn't been a feature of Canadian politics since the beginning. Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, was known to go on days-long benders where nobody actually knew where he was. When he was in London negotiating the final terms of Canada's creation, alcohol was likely a factor in an incident where he lit himself on fire. But Rob Ford was the first to do stuff like this in the camera phone era. Thus, every time he showed up in some random place and started spouting off about which city councillor he thought was hottest, there was video evidence of it. Video evidence that was soon showing up in social media feeds all around the world. Ford obviously wasn't like most politicians, even though his dad was a former member of the Ontario legislature. Rob Ford was actually one of the first examples of something that's now quite common in Western democracies: populist, anti-establishment protest candidate. The kind of guy you vote for because you hate the system and you want someone to go in and rough it up a bit.
We're exposing the corruption of the Washington Democrats, and we're draining the Washington swamp.
And Rob Ford was very much a rough things up kind of guy. But unlike other populists in that mold, Rob Ford was also remarkably genuine. He gave all Torontonians his personal phone number, and so was constantly taking random phone calls from constituents. As in, you'd see the mayor of Toronto answering his cell phone, and it was an old lady asking for a pothole to be filled, or whatever. And he promised he'd get someone right on it. And then he did. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons why this is a terrible idea for the chief executive of a city of more than 2 million people, but you can't deny that it wasn't charming. Between that, the various random drunken appearances, the weird public access-style cable show that we opened this podcast with, Rob Ford ran one of the largest cities in North America like he was the mayor of a small town in Newfoundland or something. Everyone in Toronto, Canada, and eventually the world knew Ford as an unpretentious man of the people mayor, who also shows up wasted in random places, often in front of cameras, and sometimes committing crimes. And that's where the real main character of this story comes in, a guy named Mohammed Siad, a gang member affiliated with the Dixon City Bloods, aka the Dixon Goonies, that were infamous in the Etobicoke area of Toronto for running drugs and guns. Siad went by the alias Gully, and he's the guy who takes a video on his phone of Rob Ford high in a basement smoking crack cocaine in February 2013. With this event then unleashing a months-long firestorm on everyone involved and the city of Toronto as a whole. That's because Siad decided to do it so he could sell the video, so he could get some money to move out of Toronto and settle in Alberta. And when it came out that he was offering this explosive video evidence, he had every media organization in Canada running around chasing the story. Toronto City Hall turning itself inside out over the allegations, and it began the clock ticking on a scandal that would end Rob Ford's political career. Siad called up the Toronto Star and the gossip website Gawker, which no longer exists. He met with reporters from each of them under very cinematic circumstances. He would call them, tell them he had something they would be interested in. He would meet reporters at a prearranged location, usher them into the back of a car, show them the cell phone video, and then say the incriminating evidence could be theirs for 6 figures. The actual amount would change, but the price quoted to Gawker was $200,000. We know this because Gawker started a Kickstarter page to raise the money. They called it Crackstarter. It actually succeeded in raising more than that eventually, but by that time it was too late. And here's this episode's guest, Joe Warmington. A reporter and columnist for the Toronto Sun, he had a special relationship with Ford, shall we say. At particularly dark periods, Warmington was sometimes the only reporter Ford would be willing to talk to. And also, as you'll hear, when people tried to get in touch with Ford during all this, they often started by going through Warmington.
I got a call from the guy, and I used to know his name, but he was from Gawker. And he's one of the guys that saw the video. And he called me within 5 minutes of this coming out, and he said that he had the video, he wanted to, or he'd seen the video, and he wanted the Toronto Sun to get involved with him, and they'd get the video, and then they would share it with Gawker. The decision was made right there that first night. We weren't going to pay for video, and we stayed with that all the way through. But, again, we also decided to not report what he had seen. I think that if we'd reported what he'd seen, but we didn't know him, we didn't know if it was true. He called us. It was a tricky situation where we didn't get a chance to meet him. Plus, again, we weren't 100% sure if any of this was legal.
The video was from 3 months before. It was taken on the eve of Family Day, one of the more uncreatively named Canadian statutory holidays. And the setting is a small home in the same neighborhood of Etobicoke, where Ford had grown up, and where he still lived at the time he was mayor. Ford had long been friends with the home's owners, the Basso family, and went to high school with Fabio Basso. Members of the Basso family had some connections to the criminal underworld. There were 3 adult siblings in the home, one of whom worked at Ford's family label-making business, and 2 of them had criminal records. Neighbors called this bungalow the drug house. Now, we don't exactly know why Ford had gone there. It's the second day of a 3-day-long weekend, and either Ford went there in search of drugs, or he's there anyway visiting friends when the opportunity for some drugs comes up. Either way, it's 7 p.m. on the Sunday before Family Day, and the mayor of Toronto is smoking a bowl of crack in the basement of the Basso family's home, surrounded by various criminal and criminal-aligned operators, some of whom had apparently just delivered the crack.
He reminds me of some of the celebrity people that I've known over the years when they disappear on you. You know them, you talk to them on the phone, and then they disappear, and you read in the news that they're either dead, charged, or in rehab, or they lost their marriages, all those things, or some of them. And I'd lost track of him. I always had his phone number. He didn't always call me. I mean, I would call him sometimes to get the stories. Sometimes he would call me or call me back. But I saw him spiral downhill with that narcotics.
As this is all going down, Siad whips out his smartphone and pretends to be texting while surreptitiously recording a video. Siad had just recorded a scene almost as good as catching a UFO or a Sasquatch on film. He had footage of a major political figure smoking crack with gang members inside a drug house, and he immediately grasped the gravity of the image he had captured. We know because he recorded a selfie video soon after where you can see him bursting with excitement over the video.
Just gotta aim the camera towards a person, and there you don't never ever know what the f you're doing as long as you're just playing with your phone and just doing some bullshit. And yeah, that's how you catch a person slipping, catch a predator, or even catch a f***ing mayor smoking crack.
There's a John Steinbeck story called The Pearl that you probably had to read if you went to a Canadian high school. It's about a Mexican pearl diver who finds a giant pearl of untold value, only to have his life ruined by the unwanted attention it brings upon him. What followed for Siad was effectively that, except instead of a pearl of life-changing beauty, it's a grainy cell phone video of a Canadian mayor doing illicit drugs. And what followed was nothing but pain and tragedy, and not just for Rob Ford. Basically, everyone in that garage that night very quickly had bad things happen to them, usually as a direct result of Siad's video. The crack video became like a curse. If you were there when it was taken, you seemed destined to suffer some grave destiny. To gin up interest in the video, Siad released a photograph to the press showing Ford posing with 3 men outside the Basso family's garage, one of whom is giving the middle finger to the camera. Within a month of that photo being taken, 2 of those men, Anthony Smith and Mohammed Khatak, would be shot outside a nightclub as apparent retaliation for an unrelated robbery the year before. Smith was killed. The guy linked to the shooting, Hanad Mohammed, was also in the video. He was eventually arrested in Alberta for the crime, although the charges against him were later stayed.
At the end of the day, the Rob Ford was the mayor of Toronto, and he put himself in a position to be manipulated by organized criminals that were involved in all kinds of things, whether it's crack cocaine or murder.
The Basso family themselves, the owners of the bungalow in the video, would have to contend with a pipe-wielding maniac who stormed into their home looking for the crack video, or information about who had it. We don't know why he wanted the video, but his violent attack put Fabio Basso, Rob Ford's friend from high school, in the hospital. Ford's driver, Sandro Lisi, would later be brought up on extortion charges, eventually dropped, after he had gone on a personal and not tremendously above-board mission into the Toronto underworld to recover the tape before it could see the light of day. And all of this happens to coincide with a Toronto police dragnet known as Project Traveler, which is targeting Siad's gang, the Dixon City Bloods. And other members of the Dickson City Bloods start to conclude that all of this unwanted police attention might be because one of their own had started shopping around an embarrassing video of the mayor. But the Bloods might have had another reason for not liking what Siad was up to. It seems that where the gang members came from, everyone just plain kind of liked Rob Ford and didn't want to see him exploited this way. At the height of the controversy, National Post reporter Megan O'Toole went to a dingy, bullet-scarred Toronto apartment where the crack video had reportedly been stored, at least for a time. It was in a low-income apartment complex where Rob Ford had occasionally been spotted hanging out. And the people in the neighborhood said they really liked the mayor. "We don't like Rob Ford getting screwed," one man in the unit told her. "We wanted to help him. 85% of young Somalis are very upset about these guys with the video." He even detailed a plan to recruit a local Rob Ford lookalike named Slurpee and record an obviously fake crack video and release it to the press in an attempt to discredit the real one. Officers working Project Traveler would end up raiding this unit and would end up arresting many of the key players in the Rob Ford crack video saga. Amazingly, the National Post was able to get a hold of this Rob Ford lookalike named Slurpee, who said, rather sagely, that he thought it was best not to get involved in an elaborate video fraud perpetrated by gangsters. So to sum up Siad's situation as he's trying to sell this explosive video, at a certain point, he has a pipe-wielding maniac after him trying to get his hands on it. He has Rob Ford's very devoted driver, Sandro Lisi, also hunting him down to grab the video away from him. He has many of his fellow gang members after him trying to put a stop to his scheme. And now he's got the Toronto police on the case trying to get it to build an extortion case, and as part of their investigation into the Dickson City Bloods. We've never actually heard Mohammed Siad's side of this chaotic story, but we do know it didn't end well for him. When Gawker tried getting him the money it had raised from its crack starter, it couldn't find him anymore. He'd gone to ground. Gawker's editor said he was probably frightened and skittish. That's a pretty good guess. So who finally found Mohammed Siad? The police, of course. He was swept up in a raid linked to their Project Traveler gang investigation and charged with multiple counts of trafficking cocaine and firearms. They also arrested a lot of his fellow gang members, which they probably blamed him for. So then things got even worse for him. While he's in custody waiting for trial, he's reportedly stabbed by his fellow gangsters who are in jail with him. And the police were the ones who finally got their hands on Siad's video. He never got to sell it. And the cops didn't even release it, at least not for a long time. It wouldn't be seen until years later, after all the dust had settled. In October 2013, Siad goes to jail for 8 years on the drug dealing and gun charges. So in exchange for a get-rich-quick scheme that upended Toronto politics and made a Canadian mayor one of the world's most well-known municipal officials, Mohammed Siad got nothing, turned much of the Toronto criminal world against him, and ultimately got thrown in prison and stabbed. Meanwhile, from Rob Ford's perspective, you could argue that this whole saga actually turned out a lot better than it could have. Because while Rob Ford may have been a figure of fun, it was not fun to be Rob Ford. It's not that Ford liked to party or have a few jars after work. He obviously had a really bad addiction problem on seemingly everything: drinking, drugs, junk food. Here's a really telling example. In 2014, Ford was a guest on the web series Coffee Run with the Canadian music producer deadmau5. The videos have deadmau5 take guests out for coffee and then they chat en route. Ford's coffee order was 5 espresso shots at once. If you gave that much caffeine to, say, a Mormon teenager, it would put them in the hospital.
Hi, welcome to Tim Hortons.
Hi.
Hi, what can I get for you?
Can I get an extra large double-double?
Yes.
And, can I get 5 espressos in 1 cup?
I'm sorry, it's very hard to hear you.
Can I get an extra large double-double?
Yes, I got that.
And 5 espressos in 1 cup.
I'm sorry?
But Ford pounds it back like it's nothing. This was during a period when he was supposedly clean, and pounding back industrial quantities of either sugar or caffeine is classic recovering addict behavior. And where Rob Ford's antics get much less funny is when you remember who's being hurt by them and who could have been hurt by them. He appears to have driven drunk rather routinely in his 6,000-pound black Cadillac Escalade. The book Mayor Rob Ford, Uncontrollable, written by Ford's former chief of staff, details multiple incidents in which the Toronto police stopped Rob Ford's car while he was driving home impaired. And then rather than charging him with impaired driving, they simply drove him the rest of the way. That same book included an incident where a mayoral staffer, Chris Fickle, was being driven around by Ford when the mayor stopped and chugged a 12-ounce bottle of vodka before continuing on his way, which, to be clear, is the equivalent of drinking 2 six-packs of beer all at once. Ford had 2 young children, and they were definitely privy to their dad's drunken behavior and wild, unpredictable mood swings. And one particularly notorious incident also detailed in the book Mayor Rob Ford, Uncontrollable, a badly intoxicated Ford dragged his children to the Garrison Ball, an annual black-tie dinner to celebrate members of the Canadian military. Ford arrived 2 hours late and so inebriated he was incoherent. When staffers tried to block him from entering, he flew into a violent rage, at one point threatening to drop his chief of staff with a punch. His children were present for all of it, running circles around him. And obviously, there were the drugs. As the Ford saga came unwound, there were stories about his alleged use of cocaine, marijuana, hash, and crack. Now, if you talk to people who have recovered from severe alcoholism or drug addiction, they'll often describe a bottom, a point where the harms from one's addiction become so egregious that it drives them to seek treatment. Your wife leaves you, you lose your job, you lose custody of your children. Sometimes that bottom is fatal, so you never get a chance to turn it around. So when you can get a bottom without any major criminal or physiological consequences, it's a win. And for Ford, that bottom turned out to be the humiliation of publicly admitting a drug problem to basically the entire English-speaking world, and then being systematically stripped of almost everything that had ever given his life meaning and purpose. Ford never resigned over this. He just saw most of his staff resign in protest, and then Toronto City Council stripped him of most of his mayoral powers. So he got to remain mayor, but he couldn't do anything. But he didn't overdose or go out in a flaming drunk driving car wreck. This was all just a few years before fentanyl began heavily contaminating the drug supply and killing unsuspecting users, so he dodged that bullet. And remarkably, his wife and family stuck with him through it all, including his always loyal brother, Doug. So the public political humiliation was it, and it was the impetus to him getting clean, which was good because, as it turns out, Ford didn't have much time left to live after all. In September 2014, apparently clean and sober, and just as he was getting ready to prepare a re-election bid for mayor, Ford was diagnosed with cancer. The way Ford dealt with his cancer was very much on brand with why voters had been attracted to him in the first place. When Canadian politicians get cancer or any other serious illness, the usual inclination is to be very guarded on the details. That's what NDP leader Jack Layton did around this time. A fellow Torontonian, Layton was diagnosed with cancer in 2010, but that's basically all we know. Layton made one public appearance where he was visibly emaciated, and then no updates until one day his family just announced he had died. We don't even know the type of cancer that killed him. But Ford's cancer was an ugly, full-color affair in which no detail was spared. You shouldn't be embarrassed by cancer, but this was a particularly embarrassing cancer to get. It was fat cancer, as in the tumor develops in your body's cellulite. And in Ford, the tumor was in his abdomen and his butt. He got an extremely rare cancer that develops in buttock cellulite. Ford could have just said he had a long illness, but he didn't hold back on anything. He authorized the leader of his medical team, Zane Cohen, to deliver a press conference before the world's media detailing exactly where the cancer was and how likely it was to kill him. To this day, Ford remains the one name most associated with pleomorphic liposarcoma, aggressive cancer of the fat cells. In October 2015, when Ford had just 5 months left to live, he stood in front of a press scrum on the sidewalk outside Toronto's Mount Sinai Hospital, said cancer had spread to his bladder, and just openly detailed how awful he felt and how he figured he was nearing the end.
They did a biopsy. We're still waiting on the results, whether it's malignant or not.
Ford even got into detail about how he discovered the new tumor. He couldn't pee. Here's a quote. I'd basically have to find a washroom, get one of my staff, and a 5-minute pee would turn into a literal half-hour pee because I'd have to sit there and wait and wait and wait. There's not really any inspiring message here. It's just a human detailing how much cancer sucks, how he wishes he didn't have it, and how sad it is that he has to die now.
I remember when we all walked over to the hospital on University Avenue in Toronto. I was walking over there, and I saw satellite trucks. I'd never seen in Toronto more satellite trucks. There's like 100 of them from everywhere. Mexico, all kinds of the U.S. I saw Buffalo and Cleveland and Detroit, and I thought, what the heck is that? I couldn't believe it. So, and I walked in, and it was just packed in this hospital, and they were announcing that he had cancer. And I got to tell you that, that really, it showed like how big he'd become.
Here was a man whose political career was blown up by a video of his illicit drug use, now standing before 100 cameras, being human and vulnerable and sad. Nobody, with the exception of a few journalists and police officers, ever saw the Rob Ford crack video while the scandal was playing out, or while Rob Ford was alive. In an age when we assume that we can basically see anything, this was one of the last examples of knowing that something existed, but not being allowed to see it. You name it, a plane crash, leaked nude photos, footage of some horrifying crime, all of these things can be all over your social media feed within seconds of hitting the internet. But for multiple months in the spring and summer of 2013, seemingly the entire world looked to Canada over the intrigue of an alleged piece of tape that nobody could see, and whose existence was not even a certainty. The video finally came out in 2016. The courts had kept it sealed while the trials of the main characters played out, then allowed it to be released when the hearings were all over. What's remarkable is that it didn't really get all that much traction. It was 70 seconds of video over which literal blood had been shed, which had attracted world attention unlike anything else out of Canada, and for which hundreds of strangers had put up a collective $200,000 for the privilege of seeing it. Millions gloried in videos of Rob Ford making an ass of himself, and this was supposed to be the apex. But when it finally came out, there were very few who could watch it and feel anything other than pity or embarrassment. Ford was dead. The shock value of a mayor smoking crack had long worn off, and, well, people smoking crack is not a pretty sight.
Crack is not something you can try once, and you can't just try it twice either. It's like, okay, I tried it once, maybe I'll try it one more time because it was so, potent. But you can't stop there. And that's what we saw with him. That's why it was an important story, too, is that we got to see what that drug does. It's destroyed so many people in Toronto, in across the U.S. as well, and other parts of the world.
The video shows Ford in a dingy basement, so drunk and high, he can barely talk. It's a Sunday night, and instead of being a few blocks away at home with his wife and kids, he's here, listening to Elena Basso sitting off camera, praising him for being such a great family man.
Drives you. Family.
Driving the minority. I'm right wing. I think these guys are
You're right wing?
No, they say I'm just right wing.
Oh, yeah.
Radical guy.
Sure.
I'm
Sure. Oh, yeah. What the
Here's one Reddit comment from the time that kind of sums it all up. I thought this would be funny. I've never been more wrong in my life. This is hard to watch. I really wish this came out when he was still mayor so he could have been forced to resign and taken to get the help that he needed. As for Mohammed Siad, the guy who unleashed so much havoc with his video, he hasn't been heard from since. Canada Did What is a post-media podcast. This episode was hosted and written by me, Tristan Hopper, and produced by Andre Proulx, with theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libben is the executive producer. You can subscribe to Canada Did What on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you pay us enough, I'll even send it to you via cassette tape. If you like this episode and want to hear more of Canada Did What, you can make that happen simply by leaving us a rating or a review and telling everyone you know to listen as well. Be sure to check out the previous season of Canada Did What if you missed it the first time.